if the ANC had a revolutionary proletarian leadership, then there would be an awful lot more interference from imperialism from outside. I mean, even in Zimbabwe, where the imperialists all thought that Robert Mugabe was the perfect African gentleman, so long as he didn't fulfill the lifelong ambition of every ZANU and ZAPU and Zimbabwean freedom fighter, which was to get back the land. As late as the 1960s, the British government was taking people from England, clearing the land in Zimbabwe, or Rhodesia as it was then, clearing it of the black population and settling white farmers there, and who farmed on a commercial basis in order to produce tobacco and asparagus for the multinationals, while the local people were just left to starve. So when they went out to fight the liberation struggle, they were fighting for land. And when that struggle came to an end and a deal was reached, it was on the understanding that in the fullness of time, that land would go back to the Africans. But when that didn't happen, then of course the land was seized, and then all of a sudden Mugabe grew horns, and he became the worst terrible dictator that the world has ever seen, and all kinds of people who ought to know better denounce him right, left and centre. But anyway, I'd like at this point to ask Godfrey to give us his poem on Zimbabwe. Thank you very much.
Am I all right without a microphone?
Yes. Always, as always.
In introducing this poem, I really first of all have to thank Comrade Kwesi for such an informative introduction and discussion, because it's very, very important that we in the working class movement in this country give absolute and resolute solidarity and support to the struggles of working and oppressed people all over the world, and that we do so in an intelligent and an informed way, which is why a meeting like this is so important. Now, I wrote this poem a long time ago, right back in the mid-1970s, when some of us, Ella and some of the rest of us, may still remember, were in the Zimbabwe Solidarity Front. It was a time when the people of Zimbabwe were fighting against the settler fascist regime that was led by Ian Smith. It was a time when we recognised how important it was to understand the real leadership of that struggle, and that leadership was ZANU, led then by Robert Mugabe, and Robert Mugabe is still leading an anti-imperialist struggle of the people of Zimbabwe against imperialism. So this poem is in the spirit of the solidarity that the working class has to show, not out of some kind of kindness, but because unless we do support all the anti-imperialist struggles all over the world, we ourselves will be completely unable to achieve anything in struggling for our own emancipation. Just a few technical terms. We've had reference to ZANU, the Zimbabwe African National Union, already. There's, in this poem, you'll come across ZANLA, the Zimbabwe African National Liberation Army. You'll come across Chinmurenga, which I believe is a Zimbabwean, I believe, Shona word for people's struggle. You'll also come across a name which you might well have forgotten by now, Bishop Mugabe, who was a great pet of imperialism, and who, if you can remember at the time when they were after Lancaster House, when they were holding elections in Zimbabwe, all our press were absolutely convinced that Bishop Mugabe was going to win those elections. In fact, the ZANU wiped the board. Anyway, this is a poem, and it's called Pamberi Ne Chinmurenga, which is forward with the liberation struggle. Can I have a bit of water? Thank you, I'm sorry, my mouth is drying up already. It's all right, it's not a long poem. Hard, cold iron chains, forged in the fires of fierce oppression, begin to fracture at the crack of ZANU's guns. Zimbabwe, how your daughters and your sons have made the blood run cold in Smith's despairing veins. Well may imperialism quake and seek another stooge. Clasping at Muzarewa's treachery, it prays that this blacksmith can forge the neo-fetters of false liberty and let the imperialist parasite its raging thirst yet slake. Imperialists and lackeys, do your worst. In ZANU's guns Zimbabwe's people trust. Intent the foes of freedom to o'erwhelm, the country's youth has risen up in anger. ZANU, steer true the course of Chimurenga. Hold fast the helm, hold firm the line that leads to liberty. By people's war Zimbabwe shall be free.